Welcome into the Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things college basketball, WNBA, and oh so much more. I am Mia O'Brien, joined as I always am by the illustrious Mitchell Northam, who was everywhere in the world of both men's and women's college basketball last week. I think I filled in the 30% that you weren't covering last week, Mitch. I also tried my hand at some volleyball coverage. So, hey, it's crossover season, and we are here to get you caught up to speed and the very latest in everything in basketball and the world, especially on the women's side. How are you through 1 week of the college hoop season, sir?
I'm good. I'm energized. I'm excited. I'm a little tired from driving to Charlotte and back yesterday. But it's been good. Seen some good women's hoops. Seen some good men's hoops too. Got an up close look at Cooper Flag, and yeah, I've seen that you've been at your fair share of hardwood courts too.
Yes, if you had told me 1 week ago, Mitch, when we were recording our week one show, that after watching a Florida men's team handle a USF team that I have arguably in the top 40 of my AP top 25 poll, if I was to extend it out to 40, and a team that was coming off of quite literally the loss of their head coach, a tragic, passing of Amir Abdur-Rahim a couple weeks ago. And I thought Florida was graceful in that game. They wore the shirts in honor of Coach Abdur-Rahim. They showcased why they are a top 25 outfit. And if you had told me last time we sat here to record a podcast that I would have to spend the better part of my weekend handling the fallout of a Todd Golden, is he out here messaging young women? Is he not? I don't think I would have believed you. So what a first week of college basketball it was. And so without further ado, I'm so excited to hear about the Allied tip-off that you were able to cover in Charlotte and much more. But let's begin this episode as we do each and every week with our Her of the Week nominees. Mitch, kick us off. Who was your Her of the Week?
Yeah, my her of the week is Destiny Adams, who plays at Rutgers and is a forward there. She started her career at North Carolina. I help Mel Greenberg out of the USPWA with our, Players of the Week awards. And yesterday, when I was looking at some box scores, I was like, whoa, Destiny Adams, 36 points, 22 rebounds in a win over NJIT. Then I went back and started looking at some more Destiny Adams box scores. Rutgers is 3-0 this season, and Destiny Adams is a big reason why. In a win over Cornell, she had 30 points and 15 rebounds. So back-to-back 30 points games for her. She's playing really, really well and is off to an awesome start this season. And yeah, Rutgers is the benefit of it. I think your her of the week is another former North Carolina Tar Heel, is it not?
Indeed. We're going to go out to the West Coast, which technically is Big Ten country now, things I never thought I'd say as well, Mitch. And I'm going to name Deja Kelly my her of the week on the very same day that she and Oregon played, that being November 4th. She also was the Big Ten Plus sideline reporter for the men's game later that day in Eugene. Just a great example of not only what my hope is for young women in the industry, that they're out there, they're getting it, they're seizing that opportunity. Big Ten Plus, SEC Network Plus, ESPN Plus here locally. It's so encouraging to see. It's not just, us old heads who are coming back and having the opportunity to call those games, but when young current students are out there seizing that opportunity and getting reps, it warms my heart. But yeah, people were not too happy about this, Mitch. People were like, I can't believe that she has to do that, that she would have to quickly change out of her uniform and run to the men's game. And it's like, no, she's willingly signing up for this because the odds are good, depending on if Deja Kelly ends up going pro or not. If she's to go into local news, local sports, I'm not saying that I've ever played in a Division I women's basketball game and then covered a Division men's basketball game later that day. But I certainly have worn many hats on a single day. So I think she's getting ready for the wide world of communications.
No, yeah, this is something that Deja Kelly very much wants to do. I got to, spend a lot of time last year with her, of course, as I was reporting my North Carolina book, but also just gotten the chance to cover her over the past 4 years here in the Triangle. And yeah, I mean, one of the reasons she picked North Carolina in the first place was because they have a great journalism program. And she is someone who very much from early on knew that she wanted TV to be part of her career, whatever that is. Whenever the ball stops bouncing for her, maybe while the ball is still bouncing for her, she wants to keep doing TV. I'm sure we'll get to this later too, but Deja Kelly has been off to an awesome start this year on the court. She had, 20 points and 9 rebounds and 5 assists last night, Sunday night, in Oregon's upset win over Baylor. Oregon is in the AP Top 25 poll today as of Monday, and Deja Kelly, a big reason why.
Do we know if there was a men's game last night? Did she call the men's game after? I just had to ask.
I don't think so.
I don't think so as well.
We'll see more of that.
Yeah, and look, Oregon was a team that in our preseason preview show, we said you could argue that the seat is getting a little bit warmer in Eugene than it was circa 4 years ago when Sabrina Ionescu was the headliner. Sabrina, though, was out in Eugene for last night's game.
Yeah, I think it's a make or break year for Oregon, and they're off to a good start. They seem like they're going to make it, so to speak. They seem well on their way to establishing themselves once again as like one of the top teams in the country, getting an early signature win over Baylor. Big Ten play, not going to be easy, though. That's going to be a gauntlet, and we'll see how that goes.
So your her of the week is Destiny Adams of Rutgers, mine Deja Kelly of Oregon. Once upon a time, both North Carolina Tar Heels. Do want to give a shout out to Kiyomi McMiller, the star freshman of Rutgers as well, who dropped a cool 25 points earlier this week as well on Sunday night. So Rutgers is 3-0. Oregon's off to a hot start. Let's dive into some more teams that are off to a wicked hot start to begin the 2024-2025 season. I think throughout the duration of tonight's starting five, Mitch, and I know we're going to get to this when we actually get to the meat and potatoes of today's episode, the SEC, I think, is on the hot seat, at least through 1 week of the college basketball season. Lead us off with this week's starting five.
Yeah, so Norfolk State upset Missouri on Sunday. I believe the score was 57-54. If I have it in front of me, yes, I do. 57-54. It's the first time ever that Norfolk State has beaten an SEC team. They were led in that game, of course, by Diamond Johnson of previous Rutgers and NC State fame. A lot of people know who Diamond Johnson is. She, lit up college basketball in the Big Ten and the ACC. Has a lot of accolades and awards to go on with it. She's in her 5th year now, her 2nd season at Norfolk State, and she's off to an awesome start. She had 32 points in a win over Longwood. She has 17 in that upset win over Missouri. 6 assists in her opener over William and Mary. So Norfolk State is 3-0. I used to cover the MEAC a lot back when I was working on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And it's awesome to see a team from that league doing this well and sort of getting a little bit of the share of the spotlight here. So yeah, watch out for Norfolk State. Their next game is actually against a ranked opponent, another SEC team, Alabama. So that's a game to watch this week to see if Diamond Johnson can continue to put on a show.
That's a 3-0 Alabama team that technically in the early goings is tied for the lead in the SEC. Missouri is in the cellar of the SEC at 1-2. Ole Miss at 1-1. Of course, we know that one loss, though, came in Paris to a top 5 outfit. So therefore, we don't really judge Coach Yo and that squad 1-1. But then Arkansas sitting at 1-1, A&M at 2-1. Again, most teams at this juncture are not scheduling fellow Power 4, Power 5 opponents. And so I'm very curious to see where the SEC goes from here. A couple of other teams that are still unbeaten in that conference with some close calls. For my first nod in this week's starting five, you guys know where I'm going. And I'm excited to get one Mitchell Northam's take, but I have to lead off with the Iowa Hawkeyes. The rumors of their demise have been greatly exaggerated. Yes, Caitlin Clark is off to the WNBA. Yes, Lisa Bluter has retired. Her longtime associate head coach, Jan Jensen, is now at the helm. And a lot of the familiar pieces that you knew to grow and love over the course of the last 2 runs to the national title game, they are back, folks. I know Kate Martin has become a cult hero in the WNBA. I know Gabby Marshall is off doing great things at, I believe it's occupational therapy or physical therapy that she's studying in North Carolina. Both were courtside for Sunday's game at the Ally tip-off that Iowa defeated Virginia Tech 71-52. These are 2 teams that certainly, Mitch, the last 2 years have been two of the preeminent teams in women's college basketball, neither ranked going into this matchup. I do think that we will see both of them in the top 25 at different junctures throughout the course of this season. But my biggest takeaway, and who I am putting first and foremost into my starting five, and I never thought I would see the day, Addie O'Grady. Oh, baby. 9 of 9 from the floor, has lost a considerable amount of weight since she went through the off-season program. For her, this is now year 3, year 4 under Jan Jensen in Iowa City. She was someone that, I'm going to be honest, Mitch, and I don't feel out of turn saying this, in my group chat with my friends back in Iowa, here at my house, my family group chat, Addie O'Grady would step onto the floor each of the last 2 years, and we would all go, oh no, here we go. The girl who looks like she's running in cement. We respect the fact that you need a 5. Hannah Stolke is not a true back to the basket center. But is Addie O'Grady actually going to play to the level of Monica Sonano? Dare I say the level of Megan Gustafson? I'm not quite going to go that far just yet, but I do think Sunday was a major statement.
Yeah, my takeaways from this game were just that, being there and seeing it in person. I voted for Iowa in my preseason AP poll, and I voted for them again this week. And I feel vindicated. I feel like they're going to be one of the best 25 teams in the country. Yeah, they don't have Caitlin Clark, and they don't have a lot of those other pieces, the Kate Martins and the Gabby Marshalls of the world. But they do have Hannah Stolke, and they do have Lucy Olson, and they do have Addison O'Grady, and some other really great players. But yeah, O'Grady was kind of the talk of the post-game press conference yesterday, because we all get the box score, and it's like, wow, 9 for 9, really? It was kind of a quiet 18 points, but to shoot 9 from 9 from the floor against, a solid ACC team in Virginia Tech, pretty impressive. And I think it shows that she has grown into this role, and she is now a serviceable center and someone who can maybe sort of be that third banana, as Lucy Olson and Hannah Stolke kind of drive the bus for this team.
It also says that even though she's moved down the bench to the head coaching role, Jan Jensen still may be the best post whisperer in college basketball, men or women, by the way, that is, because again, I'm not going to put Addie in the conversation of Megan Gustafson and Monica Sonano. But if you just go back to Bethany Doolittle, like the names that you can rattle off that Jan Jensen has cultivated over the course of their time in Iowa. I mean, she's a miracle worker, quite frankly. And the fact that she's still doing that, despite now having so much more responsibility, nothing short of incredible.
By the way, I'm going to have to check and see if Gabby Marshall is playing in any intramural leagues at UNC Chapel Hill while she's getting her post-grad degree there. I imagine she might be tearing some things up over at Woolen Gymnasium.
I know she was out back home in Cincinnati, and she led the roar or whatever, the roar of the jungle that they do for the Bengals game. And then she was back in Iowa City a few weeks ago with Kate Martin and Caitlin Clark and, Jada Giamfi. I mean, she may not show up in your box score, but trust me, she may be the most important character of this Iowa team because she is the social media maven. So if you don't follow them, trust me, look, it's not going to be the Caitlin Clark experience. You're never probably going to get to that juncture again. I actually had a friend text me that every elementary school student in the state of Iowa was gifted a new children's book today. And it says, play like Caitlin. Or just like Caitlin, excuse me. Look, this is something, folks, you're never going to see ever again. And that's okay. But I do think that Iowa can return to the form we saw circa 2019 when Megan Gustafson was at the forefront of that squad. And Kathleen Doyle, for that matter, who now, of course, is on the bench for Virginia Tech.
Yeah. Jan Jensen mentioned that in the post-game press conference yesterday. I actually forgot that Kathleen Doyle was working at Virginia Tech now. So that was cool to see.
All right. Who's number 3 in your starting 5 this week?
Yeah, my number 3 is just kind of the storyline, sort of one of the storylines coming out of the Ally tip-off, which is sort of this idea of can Charlotte host a Final Four again someday? I think that they should. I think it would be a great city for it. I think the Spectrum Center has proven to be a great venue for women's basketball. For the second year in a row, this event, the Ally tip-off, reset the record for the most attended regular season women's college basketball game in North Carolina, over 15,000 fans. And once again, for the second straight year, all the coaches really raved about the atmosphere and the environment and everything that was going on there in Charlotte with Ally Tip-Off, from Ally's involvement to the Charlotte Sports Foundation, to the comfy T-shirts that Home Field Apparel put together. That
Shout
I
out
got.
Home Field.
Yeah, shout out to Home Field. But yeah, in the post-game press conference, I asked Dawn Staley, as someone who played for the WNBA team that used to be in Charlotte, and someone who has seen women's basketball at their apex in Charlotte, hey, do you think this city can host a Final Four again? And she was basically like, yeah, absolutely. It would be incredible. And there's a lot of people who agree with her. Among them is Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, who last month at ACC Tip-Off was asked about the interest of bringing a women's Final Four to Charlotte, and said the interest is high. So you can read all about that and more about all that, Charlotte potentially hosting a Final Four, in a story that I wrote at North Carolina Public Radio. That's WUNC.org. I wrote all about what Dawn and Jim Phillips had to say. And, the Final Fours are booked out until 2031. But hey, maybe 2032, we can see a Final Four in the Queen City.
I do think it's more likely that we see one in the Queen City than in the River City here in Jacksonville, although that was also floated to me this weekend, as luck would have it, with, of course, the new reimagined Everbank Stadium signed off on. This is becoming the new hip thing, of course, Mitch, the idea of, can we put basketball Final Fours for both the men and the women in football stadiums? Ultimately, right now, it's the Jaguars reimagined stadium that will open in 2028. There's still a lot of questions that need to be answered in terms of, is it actually a transparent roof? Is it a real roof? That's great that the sides are open, like SoFi Stadium. That's another example of a venue that has certainly hosted a lot of concerts. I got a chance to see one of them last summer, but could they actually host a Final Four without true air conditioning in the building? And so I think it's fascinating, given a lot of different reasons. But yeah, I more likely Charlotte than Jacksonville, but hey, maybe we can dream.
Yeah, Charlotte, I think, would be perfect for a women's Final Four. Having been to a couple of them now, it's really walkable around that Spectrum Center area. They have the hotels, they have the arena, and they have the fan support. I think the Ally Tip-Off, for 2 years in a row now, has been a great sign of that. This year, even topping the number that you had last year, when last year you had Caitlin Clark and you had a ranked Virginia Tech team, to even top that number this year without that sort of star power, I think is super impressive, and a sign of that this city, Charlotte, really supports women's basketball.
Dawn Staley, probably the biggest star, I would argue, of the weekend.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I figured that would be the case. We'll circle
Dawn
back
Staley
to that.
And her outfits. Yeah.
Yes, we will. Yeah, she's taking the mantle from Kim Mulkey. We'll get to both of those characters coming up a little bit later in our week 1 roundup. But we head to the front court of this week's starting 5. I will once again tap into the well of the retired coaches and the rumors of their program's demise that were greatly, greatly exaggerated. And so we stay in the ACC, as weird as that sounds, head back to the West Coast, Stanford, where Tara Vanderveer Court is officially the name of the playing floor at Maples Pavilion at Stanford University. Of course, Tara's longtime assistant, Kate Pay, is now the head coach of the Stanford Cardinal, who now somehow, some way, play in the ACC. They beat Gonzaga 89-58 on Tara Vanderveer Court this weekend, Mitch. And look, that's a Gonzaga team that's been to the tournament each of the last 3 years. And that certainly speaks to me that, while, yes, you lose Cameron Brink, yes, you lose the longtime legendary Hall of Fame head coach, they may be reloading out there on the West Coast and in Palo Alto. And perhaps, much like USC could pose a threat to the returning and the mainstays in the Big Ten, maybe Stanford could make a run at this thing in the ACC.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't really close. And this is a Gonzaga team that has Yvonne Jim on it. They have a star. They beat them by 31 points. And this is,
and look, Stanford. I know it's Tara Day, but still, that's crazy.
Yeah. And this is a Stanford team that really doesn't have a star. They just sort of play as a really well-connected unit. Like you said, Cameron Brink is not there anymore. Kiki Iriafen is not there anymore. What they did against Gonzaga was, once again, for the third game in a row, they made a bunch of 3-pointers. So I really think like this is an identity that they're taking on in year one of the Kate Pay era. Making threes, locking down on defense. They're back in the AP Top 25 poll this week, and deservedly so.
Let's round out this week's starting 5.
Yeah. So there was some news, some coaching news on Monday morning here that Ohio State hired J.C. Sheldon and Katie Smith as assistant coaches. And I thought the J.C. Sheldon thing was interesting. We're seeing a little bit more and more of that now where, current WNBA players or recently graduated college players are joining coaching staffs and these sort of like developmental roles. But the Katie Smith thing like really struck me because I was under the impression that, with all the openings in the WNBA this year, she was someone who was going to take one of those openings. I don't know if it was going to be in Chicago or Connecticut or wherever, but after being sort of the second in command to Cheryl Reeve there for a couple of years in Minnesota, I thought that she would be in demand as a WNBA coach. And I was struck by her going to take an assistant coaching job in college. Now it's at her alma mater. So I talked to some people. I put my conspiracy hat on. I got my crystal ball out. And to me, this is a sign of a couple things. One, I think, all the turnover that we've seen in the WNBA this year in terms of the coaching cycle. Job security is not great in the WNBA unless you're a top tier coach in charge of a really, really good team. Unless you're a Cheryl Reeve or a Stephanie White or a Sandy Brondello. How many coaching changes did we see in the WNBA offseason this year? So I sort of get the feeling that, Katie Smith maybe sniffed around to a couple of these openings and decided, you know what, maybe I'm better off in college where the job security is better and the money is a little bit better. And she can be closer to her family in Ohio. And I kind of wonder if this assistant coaching gig that she has now at Ohio State, again, her alma mater, if this is something that she does for maybe this season. And then when the college coaching cycle starts up in this spring, this March and April, if we don't see Katie Smith get a head coaching job in college, if we see, like if a Wright State or a Dayton or an Ohio, one of those mid-majors sort of around her in the Midwest there, if one of those opens up, does Katie Smith take one of those jobs? Or does she just stick around at her alma mater for a while until she figures out her next move? I'm keeping my eyes on this. I think this is really interesting.
Two things, Mitch. Number one, I know we're keeping score. We still have 5 openings for WNBA head coaching vacancies right now. Is it 5 or 4? I can't keep track.
I've lost track.
Yeah, I've lost track. We had 7. We had 7 at one point. I know Stephanie White obviously filled one of those voids. Assistant
The
coach
Sky
for the
made a
Aces.
hire.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. Assistant coach for the Aces. I think there's still 5, which is why I wonder if maybe, and again, I don't think this is good practice, but maybe these teams do want to wait it out. And maybe this is Katie Smith trying to say, hey, you know what? Like, that's okay. Maybe I'll be more in demand if I can help create something special in Columbus, Ohio. Or to your point, yes, the idea of her transitioning to being a head women's basketball coach at the college level, to which I say, Mitch, in an age in which we see Jeff Havley, once upon a time the head coach, at Boston College, take a defense coordinator job in the NFL, and quite frankly told people it's because I didn't want to recruit anymore. That's fascinating to see. We could see the inverse in women's basketball.
Yeah, we saw this, a couple of years ago with Nikki Collin. She was in charge of a really good dream team, and when Kim Mulkey left Baylor to go to LSU, Nikki Collin came all back to college. I think the job security and the money are both better in college. Now it's more of a commitment. It's a year-round thing because not only do you have to coach, but you have to recruit and you have all that too. But hey, that's what the money's for, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I think it just kind of depends on what you want. But I do think it's really interesting that like we're not seeing a lot of, it used to be like in college football, especially when you had a really good college coach, they would kind of, oh, well, I'm going to take a crack at the NFL. And we've seen this in the NBA too, really good college men's coaches. You know, oh, I'm going to give the NBA a try. We don't really see that a whole lot in women's basketball, where people are leaving good college jobs to take a WNBA job. And so that's just kind of an interesting thing about women's basketball, that especially with this Katie Smith thing, just because I think a whole lot of people thought she was going to be an in-demand W coach this offseason and was surely going to get a job somewhere. To see her go to the college ranks after never coaching in college before, by the way, her whole coaching career is in the W, I think is really, really interesting and something to watch if this becomes a trend.
If you see me smiling, if you're watching on YouTube, that is because, of course, I can't help but laugh after 11 games of the W season this past spring/summer. So many people thought Lisa Bluter is going to come out of retirement and be the head coach of the Indiana Fever because we need her. And here we are. The Indiana Fever have a new head coach. It is not Lisa Bluter. It is not a former college coach. It's Stephanie White. So, yeah, it's the carousel has been nothing but entertaining this offseason. Again, we are only a month into the WNBA's offseason, and it has proven to still have plenty of storylines with so many vacancies still. And of course, the one big other professional women's basketball storyline we're following, will she not? The Caitlin Clark to Unrivaled. Who are the 6 remaining names? We, of course, will keep you abreast of the very latest of that here on the Women's College or the Women's Basketball Podcast. But at the same time, yeah, we got women's college basketball to talk about. So let's dive into this week's college slate, Mitch. It was a loaded one. You already touched a little bit on that Iowa-Virginia Tech game. Any other takeaways for you from the Hawkeyes and Vatek, the Hokies? The Hokies. I almost panicked there and forgot their mascot.
Yeah, I think Virginia Tech has some things that they have to figure out in terms of like who is the bus driver for them, who is the person that's going to carry this offense. Jan Jensen talked about it in Iowa's press conference. They really wanted to stop Matilda Eck. And Jan knows Matilda Eck well from her time in the Big Ten. And they did just that. They stifled Matilda Eck pretty well. And, that ended up being a pretty wide margin that Iowa won by. So, yeah, I think Virginia Tech has some things to figure out. I think Iowa is going to be perfectly fine this year. I think they're going to be a top 25 team for most of the season, and they might be a team that we see in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. I think Lucy Olson is beginning to settle into her role. She had 21 points against Virginia Tech. I think Hannah Stuelke looks like she's gaining some more confidence as kind of one of the top dogs for Iowa now. So I think they're going to be just fine going through the rest of the season.
And of course, the name you have to watch for at Iowa that's never going to quite stuff the stat sheet to what you would like it to be, that being one Sydney Upalter, only 3 points, but 6 boards, 3 assists. For you, Mitch, what, was this your 3rd or 4th time seeing Sid Dog live in action? She's just one of my favorite women's college basketball players. They call her the dog because she's just one of the scrappiest players you will see. And maybe the scoring numbers aren't as gaudy as some of her teammates, but just a great player to watch.
Yeah. She's kind of that Swiss Army knife for Iowa. I mean, like, they can ask her to go get 15 points and she'll do that, or they'll ask her to go play defense and get 10 boards and she can do that too. She's definitely an important player for them, whether she's coming off the bench or starting.
2 matches to circle for Iowa coming up in the next month or so. They will host Tennessee, and then they also will host the currently 8th ranked Iowa State Cyclones. Those games literally coming back to back, December 7th and December 11th. So keep an eye out for those. Those will be some goodies, and obviously an opportunity for the Hawkeyes to cement themselves as a top 25 team. Let's get to the biggie at the Ally tip-off. Dawn Staley's South Carolina Gamecocks travel up to North Carolina. What did we learn about this team, besides the fact that Ashlyn Watkins has been cleared of her charges, suspension, and the very latest with that?
Yeah. So Ashlyn Watkins is back. And frankly, they needed her in this game because they didn't have Chloe Kitts. Chloe
Who
Kitts
also now, by the way, is on academic probation. You lose one, you gain one, you lose the other.
Yeah, it's wild. It never stops for South Carolina. Dawn did say that it's just a 1-game thing for Chloe Kitts. So she should be back in the mix, very soon. But yeah, and in a 14-point win over NC State, Watkins was important. She had 6 points, 6 boards off the bench. My takeaway was just like South Carolina is inevitable. Like when I read before the game tips off that like Chloe Kitts is available, I'm like, oh man, okay, maybe NC State can really attack them inside, and maybe they no. The big thing again, and I thought when I talked on this show a week ago, I thought this was going to be a different game than we saw in last year's Final Four, and it was to a degree. But when it came down to it again, it was the rebounding once again. And this is a game that didn't feature Camila Cardozo or River Baldwin, but rebounding was the thing again. South Carolina out rebounds NC State 40-25. NC State had just one offensive rebound, which is wild. Like, you don't win games when you get one offensive rebound. Wes Moore said in the post-game press conference, use the old Dennis Green thing. They are who we thought they were, which was great. Because this is what South Carolina does to people. They kill them inside on the boards and on the glass. They kill them in the paint. And then you get Tahina Pau going off for 23 points. You get Malaysia Fulwiley going off for 18 points. And then everybody else around them just kind of does their job. So NC State still has to figure out like what they're going to do in the front court in terms of replacing that presence of River Baldwin and Mimi Collins. But I think they'll be fine. But as far as South Carolina goes, like I said on an earlier show, like as long as they keep on winning, like they're going to be number one in the AP Top 25 poll, and they're going to look like the favorite to win the national title again.
Do you think their starting five is set? Obviously, again, no Chloe Kitts this last time out, so I think that played a factor. More so, I'm wondering, is Malaysia Fulwiley just going to be the sixth man of the year? Like, is that, or sixth woman of the year? Or is that a very fluid situation too? Because it stuns me for a player who impresses in the national title game. Her mixtapes and her highlight reels are so high. The highs are so high. It's just interesting to see her coming off the bench.
Yeah, I do think that, I don't think it's like set in stone necessarily. Like, I think you might see like Ashlyn Watkins become a starter again, and you might see Chloe Kitts start again. I'm not sure that Sanaya Fagan is the answer to keep starting in the front court. Joyce Edwards started this game. I think you're going to see them mix up the front court a little bit in terms of starters. So, no, I don't think it's settled yet. In terms of the backcourt, though, I do think that you might still see Malaysia Fulwiley and Tessa Johnson both still come off the bench. I think it's just like a flex thing for South Carolina, really. It's like, we can start this great backcourt of Tahina Pau and Raven Johnson. And oh, by the way, Bree Hall's over there as well. And then when they get tired, we can bring in Malaysia Fulwiley and Tessa Johnson, who were instrumental in winning the national championship last year for them. Fulwiley was the SEC tournament MVP. And yeah, she might come off the bench all year, and she might still average, 15 points a game coming off the bench. So yeah, it might be a thing where, they're just so deep, like she has to come off the bench all year. And then, next year after Pau's gone, maybe she takes over.
18 points in 18 minutes. That's pretty rad. South Carolina wins it 71-57. Because we play this game on my daily program on 1010XL, Helmets and Heels, I'm going to bring this game to the women's basketball podcast, Mitch. When will the Chiefs lose? When will South Carolina lose? I think like this may actually be more difficult than even looking at the Kansas City Chiefs upcoming schedule and trying to figure out where there could be a slip up. They do travel to UCLA in 13 days' time. We don't know what that UCLA team will look like and who will be available, who will not, certainly. They do host Iowa State. That is a top 10 team at this juncture. Duke, a team that we will get to here in just a little bit, a week after that. And so they do have 3 top 25 teams coming up on their schedule, but do any of those 3 actually pose a legitimate challenge to the Gamecocks?
I think that there is potential for one loss in that window between that 4-game stretch you just talked about, where they're at UCLA and then against Iowa State and Purdue. The Purdue's not going to be the loss.
They do play TCU. They play TCU after Duke, and people are suddenly high on the Horned Frogs again.
Yeah, and then they host Duke. I think, UCLA, like we talked about Lauren Betts on the last episode in terms of like her taking the charge and being the best player. She just scored a career high 31 points in their latest win. So if she's taken like a big step forward this year, and you don't have that Camila Cardozo that can go toe to toe with her inside, I think that could be something that poses some problems for South Carolina, especially in a road environment at UCLA. Iowa State is a super interesting game, just because of like,
Oh, with Audi, the matchup,
yeah,
the
uh,
matchup.
Audi Crooks, Addie Brown, like that's really interesting. So I don't know what's going to happen there. Iowa State could play the best game of their lives and pull off an upset. And then Duke is a team that, we'll get to them in a second, but like, um, defensively, like when they're at their best, like they can drag opposing teams into like some dark places, and just kind of impose their will. I think they're going to get better as the year goes along. And they showed against Maryland that like they can score in the 80s if they need to. So that's going to be a good game as well. And South Carolina, I think last year when they played at Duke, early in the season, they were down at one point, like in the first quarter or the second quarter. That was a competitive game for a little bit. So I think somewhere in that stretch, like it's possible that South Carolina tumbles and takes a L. If not, when we get to SEC play, like they're gonna have a 4-game stretch where they play Texas, Alabama, Oklahoma, LSU, Tennessee. I mean, that's a pretty tough 5-game stretch. The SEC part of it, anyways, is going to be a gauntlet this year.
And because I know so many of our friends at OG Triangle Media keep tabs on the Wolfpack, just looking ahead to their schedule, they will travel to TCU. Man, TCU ain't scared to play nobody, Mitch. They will travel to TCU on Saturday this week. They also will host Ole Miss the first week of December before their ACC play actually kicks off in December, when they will face Louisville on December the 15th. But not a whole lot in between there in terms of top 25 wins that the Wolfpack could pick up that could kind of bring them back into the conversation.
Yeah, and that's probably like for the best for NC State, that they have a little bit of a soft spot in their schedule, because I really think they need to figure out who is going to be the person that steps up for them in the front court and really like solidify that rotation a little bit. The other thing that hurt them against South Carolina, with Sinai Rivers getting into a bit of foul trouble in the first half and not really being available for a long stretch. And I think, Isaiah James stepped up. She played well. Zam Jones really played well, a freshman, 16 points off the bench. So they have like different pieces stepping up. I think they just need to figure out and like concentrate the rotation a little bit more and kind of figure out who the go-to players for them are going to be this year.
So South Carolina wins game 1 of the Allied tip-off 71-57. Iowa wins game 2 71-52. Far from the only marquee games over the first weekend of the women's college basketball season. This one, it surprised many. It did not surprise the two hosts of this program because we talked about it last week. Brenda Frese, the Maryland Terrapins, they are back. How many new players, Mitch? 11 that Brenda brought in this offseason?
It's double digits. I can't remember if it's 10 or 11, but it is quite a bit.
It is quite a bit, and this was quite a bit of a stunner on Sunday as Maryland, yes, at home, but defeats Duke 85-80. Give us the primer on this one.
Yeah, I mean, you get 23 points from Kayleen Smickle. You get a double-double from Christina Dulce. You get a game from Cheyenne Sellers where she really controls the game. 17 points, 7 boards, 5 assists. Maryland played well. They didn't take a lot of threes, but they shot 66%. That's pretty good. And really the difference of the game is like when Maryland got to the free throw line, they made their shots. And when Duke got there, they missed more than they should have. Duke missed 12 free throws and lost by 5 points. So like that stings if you're Duke. I was listening to Carol Austin's post-game press conference, and she talked about how she's been wanting to play, a game at Maryland ever since she got the job because she's from the DMV. Didn't really care about the, renewing the ACC rivalry aspect of it, but just kind of wanted to play a game in her home backyard. But she also wanted to just test her team early. And like Duke is going to play a lot of road games in non-conference play. They've already played 2. They played at Liberty. They played at Maryland. They're going to play at South Dakota State. They're going to
Another
go to
team we'll
South
get to
Carolina.
later in this program here tonight.
Yeah, and then they're going to go to South Florida at the end of December. And I think that's Kara's way of, this is a young Duke team still. They brought back 4 starters, but a lot of those players were freshmen and sophomores last year. So I think she is trying to throw them into the fire early and figure out what needs to be fixed, what works, what doesn't, as they go into ACC play. I can tell you what works for Duke right away is played Toby Fournier, who led them in scoring off the bench, 15 points, and had 9 rebounds as well and 2 blocks. She is going to angle, I think, for ACC Freshman of the Year this year, and I think she's going to angle for more playing time under Kara. But yeah, it's a great win for Maryland, a good signature win at home as they kind of continue non-conference play for sure.
And it's impressive because the rotation is 8 deep, and that's all they need. And It is a team that certainly, I think, Cheyenne Sellers is the headliner because she is the one holdover and the mainstay in College Park. But it's a team that I think we'll get to learn all these other pieces that have been scoured in the transfer portal and beyond by Brenda Fries for, and certainly a massive 85-80 win for the Terps. The Terps, it's interesting when you look at their upcoming schedule, Mitch. I think a home game against Toledo, I don't want to say that is the toughest level of competition that they could face until they play Michigan State on December 29th. But right now it reads as such, and that's with all due respect to Syracuse, who they will face later this week.
Yeah, they should be able to go up to Syracuse and get a win. I think Syracuse is a team that's like still figuring out how to play without Deasia Fair, and figuring out just like what that offense looks like. They lost to St. Joe's yesterday. So Maryland, I feel like they should kind of come out of non-conference play pretty unscathed. I'm actually going to try and see them in person when I go to Maryland for Thanksgiving. They're playing in Navy's MTE up there against George Mason on Saturday, November 30th. So I'm going to try and see the Terps in person. But yeah, I think getting a win like this over Duke, probably your toughest non-conference opponent, is a good sign for like the chemistry that you have built in this short amount of time with so many newcomers.
And meanwhile, as we alluded to, Kara Lawson has scheduled a bit of a gauntlet of a non-conference slate for her Blue Devils. They will host Kansas State. That's 10th ranked Kansas State at the end of the month. They, of course, will travel to number 1 South Carolina in December. But let's go to our next game of the week. And it is not the next opponent, but the second to next opponent, I guess it would be the right proper terminology, Mitch, that the Duke Blue Devils will face. They will travel to South Dakota State. Man, oh man, your Jackrabbits prediction this offseason, Mitch, couldn't have been more true. They win over Creighton 76-71. Let's get jacked.
Yeah, South Dakota State. They've been a good program for a while now. I got to see them in the NCAA tournament, I guess 2 years ago now. It would have been the first weekend in 2023. They played in Blacksburg when Virginia Tech was hosting, when they were a number 1 seed. Saw them beat USC and then lose to Virginia Tech. But, this is a good South Dakota State team, and they're going to shock some people. They schedule hard as well, playing Creighton, playing Duke. Brooke Meyer, 17 points, 6 rebounds, 4 players in double figures for South Dakota State. So that's a really good win for them. Creighton, Lauren Jensen, you get 23 points from her. That's awesome. But they got some things to figure out, I think. But they're ultimately I think they're going to finish, in the top 3 or 4 in the Big East. They'll be a tournament team again. But they got jacked.
Lauren Jensen finishing with 23 points. I think we're retroactively going to claim that at the University of Iowa, since that is where she began her college career. Hey, it's kind of like on the men's side, how I voted for North Florida because they upset 2 Power 4 outfits on the men's side this past week. But also Chaz Lanier, who was their leading scorer last year, dropped 19 for Tennessee against Louisville. We're claiming that as well. So I'm claiming Lauren Jensen too. I do think that Creighton's odds of finishing in the top 3 in the Big East are great, which I'm not so sure what that says about the Big East at large on the women's side. What say you?
Yeah, UConn is obviously still the top dog in the Big East. But yeah, behind them, I think we're in kind of wait and see mode with like who the other risers are going to be in that conference. Are they going to be a 3-bid league this year, a 4-bid league? Who's going to kind of step up? In the past few years, we've seen Creighton and Marquette. Georgetown had a great season last year. Maybe it's Georgetown who steps up this year and kind of fills that number 2 spot. Villanova, them have their highs. So yeah, the Big East, I think, behind UConn, it's an interesting to kind of see who rises up.
Shout out Darnell Haney and the Hoyas. I have now put the SEC on notice. I have put the Big East on notice. So let's put the Big Ten on notice as well, Mitch. Let me read off a couple of scores for you. We'll talk about each of them individually too, but big picture here. To see Harvard go to Indiana and pull off a 72-68 upset win. Illinois 83, Florida State 64, Illinois State 81, Northwestern 77. What do you make of the early goings in the Big Ten Conference?
Yeah, I think we can count out Northwestern from making the NCAA tournament this year. Yeah, they're 0-2. Not only did they lose to Illinois State, but they also lost to Lehigh. And so I don't think the Wildcats are going dancing this year. The Big Ten is big and it's kind of a mess. I think there are some really good teams in the Big Ten. Your UCLA's and USC's, the two newcomers, but then also your Iowas and Maryland. I think those teams are going to be really solid. I think Illinois is going to be a team that's kind of up and coming. That win over Florida State is a great one. That win over Marquette is a great one. The Illini got some things cooking there. Genesis Bryant, former NC State guard, is kind of the lead dog for them right now. But yeah, the Big Ten picture kind of messy. I don't really know what exactly is going to happen in that conference this season as things kind of shake out. Like, are we going to see an Oregon make a run? Are we going to see Washington make a run at all? I mean, Rutgers is 3-0. Penn State is 3-0. Like, I'm just not sure yet. And Indiana losing early, that's not great, but I think they're better than that Harvard game. I think they're going to bounce back. Michigan, if you look at the conference standings right now, they're at the bottom, but that team just gave South Carolina a run for their money. So,
and that was with 3 true freshmen being perhaps the best 3 players on the floor.
Yeah, and I think Michigan State is solid. Like, it's just going to be interesting, like, as the season goes along, like, who really separates themselves in this gigantic 18 teams. Is that how many we got in the Big Ten now?
Yes, the Big Ten has 18 teams, Mitch.
Yeah, the Big 18.
The good news is I think we're a far cry from like circa 2017, where you only had 5 Big Ten teams get into the NCAA tournament. And I don't think it's just because there's now 18 teams in the conference. I truly think the level of play has been raised. That's why I think that score, if nothing else, out of Bloomington raised eyebrows. I know that's a Harvard team that is expected to compete for the Ivy League title, but certainly a bit of a surprise. But so was Michigan bringing South Carolina to the brink in night number 1 of the college basketball season.
Yeah, and I think that end result is even more surprising because Harvard went out and lost their next game to Quinnipiac. So it's like, what happened there? What was the disconnect where you lost to Harvard at Assembly Hall? But like I said, I mentioned that game was going to be kind of a must watch, and it did not go the way Indiana wanted it to. While we're on the Big Ten, I think it's noteworthy. Like, they've had a lot of really great teams over the past several years. The Big Ten has not won a national championship in women's college basketball since 1999. That Purdue team that was coached by Carolyn Peck, because the Big Ten doesn't play
and in the men's tournament. In the men's tournament, sorry to cut you off, Mitch, the Big Ten has not won an NCAA tournament title since 2000.
2000, Michigan State, right? Yeah, because we're not letting the Big Ten claim either of Maryland's titles in 2002 for the men or 2006 for Brenda Frese and the women. So the Big Ten, like, let's see it. I don't know. Is it going to be the newcomer USC making a run this year, UCLA, or is one of their traditional powers going to step up and make a run? We'll see.
It is fascinating. Everyone wants to talk about the men's side, and I think it's largely because they want to talk about Purdue underperforming. And on the women's side, like I said, I mean, I covered a Big Ten in 2016, 2017 that only had 5 teams make the tournament. And it's supposed to be the second best athletic conference in college sports besides the SEC, allegedly. And so I think that the growth of the Big Ten, I'd like to think that rising tides raise all boats, the success of Caitlin Clark and Iowa, the turnaround at places like Nebraska, Michigan State, the continued success of the folks in College Park. I think all of that has forced the rest of the league to raise its game. And so it's good to see. And I think newcomers like USC and UCLA will only do that further. Speaking of games to watch, we are calling this segment for now at Chef's Table. If anybody has suggestions, what you'd like to call it, I know we also want to call it Making Money with Mitch, as Mitch will have some guarantees for you this weekend of perhaps, winners and losers and maybe some players to watch for. But we're calling it Chef's Table for now. It's an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert that you can look forward to this week in women's basketball. Mitch, lead us off with the appetizer.
Yeah. So on Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Plus, we got Vanderbilt at South Florida. I think this is definitely going to be a game to watch this week in terms of like non-conference matchups. Vanderbilt is 2-0. They're coming off making the NCAA tournament last season. And South Florida is 2-1. They got, smacked a little bit by UConn on Sunday, but it's UConn. That's going to happen to a lot of teams this year. South Florida has a really fun roster, though. They got Mama Dembele, a transfer from Missouri. Sammy Puisis is back in the mix. I think this game against Vanderbilt is going to be competitive and really good. And as I've mentioned before, I don't think that Vegas has totally figured out how to set the lines on women's college basketball games. So if they see this one and they say, oh, an SEC team versus the American, and you see the line way in Vanderbilt's favor, I would maybe pick South Florida to cover.
This is where you insert the cha-ching sound effect, producer Dimitri. Let's move to the entree. What is our main course this week in women's basketball, Mitch?
Yeah, so this is Friday. This is the game that I'm going to be going to this week. Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern in Greensboro at the Coliseum. It's on ESPN2. This is number 2 UConn against number 14 North Carolina. Sort of a quasi, neutral site game, but, it's in the Tar Heel State. I imagine the Tar Heels are going to pack that venue. But yeah, this is sort of the return game. Last year North Carolina went up and played the Huskies at Mohegan Sun. I think this is going to be closer than last year's game. North Carolina was dealing with some injuries last year when they lost to UConn. This is North Carolina's really like first big test of the season. So we're going to see like what they're really made of this year and if they can hang with the team, expected to compete for a national championship like UConn. But really looking forward to this one. I think it's going to be a great atmosphere. I would say if UConn's favored by like 15 points, you should pick North Carolina to cover.
Okay, I like that. I would also like to applaud the Tar Heels as a whole, their entire athletics department. The fact that the men's team did schedule a regular season home and home with Kansas. They went to Fog Allen for their second game of the season. That's the number 1 team on the men's side. The fact that Courtney and the Heels on the women's side say, you know what, we're playing UConn. Give us UConn. And that is in game number 3 of their regular season. I just want to applaud the Heels and the North Carolina community at large for saying, give us the big dog. Scared money don't make money.
Yeah, and I love that they're playing in Greensboro too. And I think that you're going to see more non-conference games at the Greensboro Coliseum in women's basketball. I think you're going to see a ACC SEC matchup there next season, from what I'm told. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, more games at the Greensboro Coliseum, please.
It's been a great venue for the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8 in the past before. So let's use it in the regular season. I love it. Kind of like the Sanford Pentagon out in South Dakota. Use it. Let's have some fun. And finally, our dessert this week.
Yeah, the number 18 Louisville against number 20 Kentucky. This is Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern. It's on SEC Network Plus, so you got to figure out how to get that. But if you can, you should definitely tune in. When Kenny Brooks was at Virginia Tech, him and Jeff Walls had a lot of great battles. Now, they're both in the state of Kentucky in this rivalry. Despite Louisville being ranked ahead of Kentucky, I think Kentucky is the better team. So if the line is swinging Louisville's favor, I would maybe take a look in Kentucky on that game. But yeah, excited to see, Georgia Amor play against Jeff Walls one more time. Excited to see what these Louisville freshmen can do against a team like Kentucky.
I was told this week the number is 9, not the line, but the number of freshmen that Jeff Walls has on his roster. Now, he does have 4 seniors as well. Not all of those have matriculated at the University of Louisville, but yeah, 9 freshmen. We've talked about it on this program before. They're impressing in, yes, a small sample size, but this will certainly be a step up in competition, I would think.
Yes, the Cardinal Kiddos.
The Cardinal Kiddos. I love that. As we put a bow on this week's episode, Mitch, any shout outs, closeouts, plugs, it is the last call here on the women's college basketball or I keep saying women's college basketball. It is the women's basketball podcast. We talk W, we talk college, but certainly we are in the heart of college basketball season.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I wrote about Charlotte potentially hosting a women's Final Four at North Carolina Public Radio. That's WUNC.org. Doing some stuff over at For the Win USA Today site as well, so check that out. And going to be doing some stuff here for the next in the next couple of days as well. So yeah, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram at Primetime Mitch.
I am not on the call of any games this upcoming week, but I would like to give a shout out not only to that UNF men's basketball team, since we already gave them some love, but the UNF women. I know it's not easy when you have to begin your slate with the likes of a top 25 Florida State team. They also lost to Georgia Southern, but the fact that they were able to put up a program best 146 points. I know it was against Trinity Baptist, but an impressive number for the hometown Ospreys. So shout out to Erica Lambert and that team. I know they're still figuring things out. Again, lost to Georgia Southern over the weekend, but hey, 146 points, hang the banner, lives forever. I was on the call of the JU women's basketball team's opener last Wednesday against Edward Waters. A shout out to Eric Jackson in his first season at the helm of the Lady Tigers. He was a 3-time, the coach that led his previous stop, Russ College. He led them to 3 GIAC titles. And so comes over with a lot of experience to the D2 HBCU Edward Waters outfit. And I'm not going to lie, Mitch, it's my first play-by-play of the season. And I'm like, okay, both these teams' first game. I know Edward Waters kind of got run out of the building by UCF. Let's see how this goes. And they jumped out to a 9-1 lead. There were no half-court sets. This thing was as fast-paced as you could imagine. And I was sitting there like, okay, all right, here we go. I don't even have time to give you, background on some of these starters and where they transferred in from because we are off to the races. And so it was an exciting game. JU came back, but always want to give a little love to our mid-majors and a shout-out to the D2 HBCUs like EDUB as well.
Yeah. And I just wanted one more shout out. We talked about Ohio State earlier because of the Katie Smith thing, but also freshman Jelani Cambridge, 31 points in her first collegiate game. So that's a name to watch as we get into Big Ten play. We talked about the Big Ten a lot too. Ohio State going to be a team to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I think with so many diaper dandies, as Dick Vitale likes to call them on the women's side this year, look, we're always going to talk Juju, Paige Beckers, and so much more here on the Women's Basketball Show podcast. But at the same time, I do think those freshmen, that may require a future episode that we break down some of those big names, the up-and-coming young guns in the women's college game. He's Mitch. I'm Mia saying so long. Thanks so much for joining us on this week's edition of the Women's Basketball Podcast. We will be back next week with even more from week 2 of the college basketball season. We'll catch you then.
Deuces.